Good morning, and what a beautiful way to start day 2 of the 2020 Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference. Thanks to all of you who have contributed photos to this presentation. As promised, we have conducted a raffle and chosen 2 raffle winners. They are Karen Emanuelson, who receives membership in the Colorado Riparian Association, Water Education Colorado, and the Colorado Watershed Assembly. Our second raffle winner is Ray Brownsberger Miller et al., who receives a full set of citizens guides from Water Education Colorado. Thanks again, everyone. My name is Casey Davenhill. I'm Executive Director of the Colorado Watershed Assembly. On behalf of the Watershed Assembly, of Water Education Colorado, and the Colorado Riparian Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of Business as Unusual. I want to use this opportunity to thank our partners and staff very quickly. As Chris mentioned yesterday, we owe a huge round of virtual applause to this conference planning team. I also want to particularly recognize the skill, patience, tenacity, creativity, and adaptability of Diane Kilty, Sammy Miller, Mallory Hist, and Brianna Federico. They are pioneers in this new world of GoToWebinars, Zoom, and Menti. Thank you so much. And another shout out to Coco Inc., Jane Mannon, and Maria Petkesh for showing us the virtual conference ropes. Thank you, Jane and Maria. And our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors who make this conference affordable and possible. We are truly grateful for the broad-based support in the community for Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference. Next slide. In particular, we would like to thank the Walton Family Foundation and Pitkin County Healthy Rivers, who make a significant investment in funding this gathering. They also show a personal interest. Yesterday, we heard from Peter Skidmore from the Walton Family Foundation with welcoming remarks and his presentation on stream mitigation. Today, Chris Wheatley with Pitkin County Healthy Rivers will help welcome you to the Colorado Water Plan session. Likewise, our headwaters sponsor, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, knows the value of networking and building community awareness. They're investing in building a strong network to support their work through their sponsorship of the Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference. And thank you, river sponsors, Northern Water, and coalitions and collaboratives. These organizations invest their time and resources in community education and provide important leadership to the watershed community. Thanks to Coco Inc. and Carol Acarius for sharing virtual meeting technology and know-how for this conference. Our stream sponsors are our bedrock. Thank you all for your steady support. We invite conference attendees to visit the virtual exhibit hall and chat with some of our stream sponsors. Let them know we appreciate their support. This year, our scholarship sponsors provided for nearly 20 student and young professionals the opportunity to listen and learn from the best, most committed and experienced water professionals in this state. Thank you to all our sponsors. And I would just like to share out that we heard early this morning that our registration and attendance for this virtual conference is over 200, about close to 250. So that is just, thank you all. Thanks to our sponsors, thanks to our attendees. And now I would like to ask you please to take this time to view a message from our sponsors, the Walton Family Foundation. Thank you. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has huge responsibilities in all areas of public health. This video tells part of that story.
Everybody wants clean water. It's important for people to drink. It's important for ag producers. It's important for wildlife, the beauty around here. That's why we all come here.
As time has changed and our uses have changed, recreation certainly is very, very dependent on water, whether you're in a reservoir, whether you're going down the river in a raft. The pressures from urbanization, from municipal use in cities. So we have to rethink how we use water. We can't just do it like we did 100 years ago.
In this headwater area, like a lot of similar areas in Colorado, this is a source water for 8 major rivers coming out of the state, most of which are on federal land and land managed by the Forest Service. So it's a big footprint from these forests.
It's a watershed, it's a catchment, and whatever happens in the catchment affects what actually ultimately gets in the stream and moves downstream. And so it's important that we manage these forests to maintain clean water that ultimately is stored on the land, released into base flows, and provides clean water for all.
I'm Ed Zink. I live on a Colorado Centennial Ranch. We support a significant ag community here north of Durango. The health of this water that comes out of the Hermosa and the Animas River watersheds. It's pretty significant to the whole region.
I'm Mark Denning, and I'm the manager of Big Creek Ranch since 2002. A lot of this area has been affected 80–90% beetle kill.
Fire has always been here. It's always been part of the landscape. And it's hard to know the role between the beetles, climate change. You get into these droughts.
Nothing will grab people's attention more than having water supplies damaged by wildfires.
We're not used to wildfires here. We've always called this the asbestos forest.
Maybe some of our past practices of putting out every fire, that wasn't such a good thing. Maybe had some smaller fires burned throughout over the last century, we would have less larger scale fires.
This 416 fire that we've had here close to Durango, it primarily burned in the Hermosa drainage, a tributary to the Animas River. The silt from the 416 fire killed all the fish in the Hermosa Creek. Lots of silt in our irrigation ditches, lots of debris flows. We're having to clean them and rebuild structures that were damaged from flash floods.
So we're on the Medicine Bow National Forest. Beaver Creek Fire started June 19th, 2016. It burned all through the summer. And so there are times it would pick up and run, and there's times it lay down.
The locals come out and the press comes out, and there's a lot of activity. And then once the fire burns down, pretty much everybody goes home and goes their own way, and we're kind of stuck with what's left, the residue.
The more of that watershed that burned at high severity, the more changes in erosion you're going to get, the more you're going to get changes in stream nutrients coming out. The more severe those fires are, the longer those wildfire effects will last.
And in many ways for agriculture, the rains and the flash floods are worse than the fire itself. The cost of the impact can be devastating and can put people out of business.
It kind of brings people's awareness to source water protection and the important role of sound land management for protecting watersheds and the delivery of water to downstream users.
We need to be involved in the planning and the management of public land to ensure that it's being managed to get the maximum water production we can get.
I mean, we're a long way from the urban corridor of the Front Range. You're in neighboring states that take advantage of this water. Having them remember where their water's coming from, the snowpack through these forest watersheds, and kind of make that connection so that they will support the idea of sound management and conservation in these headwater areas for sustained water quality.
If you aren't there, you can't be part of the solution. We've got to take that seriously and be sure that our agriculture point of view is at the table and being heard. Our lives, our businesses, our future depend on this water.
Well, those are some very, very powerful images that remind us why we're here and what we're all doing. So I'm going to ask you, please, to follow along, read along with me the announcements. Again, congratulations to Karen and Ray for the raffle winning photo submissions. Also, just wanted to remind you all that the field trips are coming up tomorrow. We are going to get outside. That's what we love to do. The field trips take place at different times, different locations. There are 3 field trips scheduled. Everyone should have been contacted by their field trip leaders. If you have any questions, please follow up with those field trip leaders. Of course, all field trips will follow social distancing etiquette. Please don't attend if you're experiencing any COVID-related symptoms or if you've been in contact with anyone who has tested positive in the past 14 days. Bring and wear a mask. Please bring your own water and snacks, and be in touch with your field trip host for more details and directions. Help us by completing our conference survey. That will be emailed out tonight. Your responses are very important to us, and they help us build a better conference every year. The conference wraps up today with our unusual happy hour from 3:45 to 4:30. We're speed networking to meet new people and find new partners and collaborators. Large group share out on reflections and inspiration that you're going home with. Bring your own beverage if you so desire. Visit the virtual expo hall. Please support the conference sponsors and vendors and learn about their services. Visit at any time. Some booths will have live hosts waiting to interact with you on Zoom during the lunch break from 12 to 12:30. Visit every booth and complete the Google form that comes with your email to enter for a chance to win a $100 REI gift card, certificates to Colorado breweries, or a set of Water Education Colorado's Citizens Guides. In order to, just a reminder on the virtual expo hall, click on the exhibitors tab. You'll find that at the top right of the homepage or to the left of the event schedule in expo. And share about the conference on social media. I know some of you do use Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, so please let your friends know what you're doing. Using a Mentimeter. All right, now is the time to enter menti.com into your phone or your computer's web browser. It will ask you for a code that is at the top of this screen. That code is 8009905. 8009905. Give you a second to do that. All right, well, let's Menti. So little word about Menti etiquette. We will be polling, Q&A will occur in Menti. Please be respectful and professional. I know we don't need to tell you all that. Please reserve GoToWebinar's question box and the chat boxes for resources for technical issues. So we do have a fixed time for questions. Please contact individual presenters after their presentations if you have any unanswered questions. All speaker information can be found in Expo. Okay, you have a Menti question for today. You are being asked to pick the corniest joke. These jokes have been especially chosen by a panel of joke selectors and giving everyone time. How are we doing with Menti? Oh, all right. It looks like everybody liked the border collie joke about rounding up. Ooh, we seem to be pretty evenly split. The Border Collie's still winning. My personal favorite is, what is the difference between bird flu and swine flu? And that is that one requires treatment and the other requires ointment. I'm glad that what did the rake say to the hoe, hi ho, is getting some good feedback there. Well, great. It looks like Menti's working, and it's always nice to start the day with a joke. So thanks for your participation. And oh, some folks are still laughing, I guess. No, it looks like the votes are in. The Border Collie rounding up the flock of sheep wins. So, business as unusual. Initially, we thought this would be a good way to bring attention to the role of private businesses and entrepreneurs in the practice of conservation. A lot has changed in the last 50 or 60 years. The environment was invented. People, and therefore businesses, started paying attention to the values of conservation, habitat protection, and watersheds. Well, we've had to rethink a lot of things in the past 9 months, but our values and what we find as important have not changed. That's why we're here today. But sometimes rethinking means we need to keep an open mind, stretch our humility, and consider other perspectives. We've chosen the next presentation by Brittany Hoffer as an exercise in listening to rivers. Please welcome Brittany Hoffer and Influence Confluence.
I'm a contemporary artist, graphic composer, and deep listener based out of Boulder, Colorado. Today I'm going to present my graphic score titled Influence Confluence as part of this year's 2020 Sustaining Colorado's Watershed Conference, Business as Unusual. Many of you are probably curious about what exactly a graphic composition is. Graphic composition began in the early 1950s when classical music notation and the aesthetics of modern art kind of collided and came into play. To simply define classical musical notation, R. Murray Schafer says it best. Quote, "Notation is an attempt to render oral facts by visual signs." So looking at the map key for Influence Confluence, something that I really want to talk about here is the idea of indeterminacy and the idea of individual interpretation. So while this map key is really just here for informational purposes, it's really also not giving you a lot of information. And that's similar to a lot of the scores that I write. I don't like to give too much information. I like to give enough information to set the context. However, what I really want to kind of emphasize is this idea of indeterminacy. And because I don't give a lot of information, I'm hoping that people will be a little bit more willing to be like, well, it's not super clear how I'm supposed to interpret this, so I'm just going to go for it. And that's really what I want, you know. For me, this idea of individuality in turn kind of comes back to community and everybody working together in a way that allows everybody to understand a similar concept, but from an individual standpoint. A non-traditionally composed network of lines and shapes influenced by interpreted data of the Colorado River, Influence Confluence is a graphic score made for any instrument to interpret the physical form of the river along with surrounding cultural phenomenon, topography, time, and spatial relationships. The composition can be played by one player or orchestrated by a larger group. Any instrument is welcome to experiment with the composition. My hope is that a new awareness around our collective human relationship with the Colorado River can be explored through this piece of work, in order to preserve our rural agricultural communities within the American West, a dialogue must be created about the delicate balance between people, place, and the natural resources we all depend on. To this end, I hope the composition can be useful. Like all rivers, ever-fluctuating entities that never stop moving or changing, this score is to be interpreted freely by each musician and artist. There are 3 parts to the score. Part 1 is the left side, which displays open circles that represent the inflows of the 5 major tributaries of the Colorado River: the Green River, the Yampa River, the San Juan, the Gunnison, and the Gila. The birth point of the river is written as a resonating circle with a sign in the center, the river itself as a primary line. This is part 2, the ever-fluctuating entity that connects us all. And part 3, on the right side, with the closed circles, represents the 7 states: Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and California, as well as Mexico, which depend on the river for agriculture, recreation, and services to municipalities. Starting at the left, follow each tributary to the middle, always returning to the sign, the Colorado River. Then, from the middle, follow all 7 outflows. It is helpful to return to the sign. End at the coda. And now for a short video of Influence Confluence.
Please go to the Menti screen and prepare some questions for Brittany. And while we're waiting for those Menti questions to come in, I'd like to say thank you so much, Brittany, for sharing your work with us and for allowing us to fit it into the time slot that we had. I'm curious. Yesterday, we heard Dave Merritt's interpretation of river music, and and references to a lot of classical music that's been used to interpret people's relationship with water. This is very different. This is a very different kind of composition, and I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about. I mean, the word I would say is just it's just dissonance, and that is a different way of listening.
So yeah, that's a great question, Casey. I was really, I loved David's presentation yesterday. I thought it was really amazing. Unfortunately, I don't have like a supercomputer brain, so I think a little bit differently. I'm a contemporary artist. I'm also a composer, non-traditional composer, and musician, as well as a deep listener. And so I think that, you know, the way that I come about these compositions, so I'll kind of try to answer your question, and I see another one down at the bottom. These really, like, they come from this idea of seeing something like a physical shape or an object and thinking about it sonically. And for me, sound is something that kind of connects us all. It's this like vibration that is similar to a river, like it's ever fluctuating. And we all kind of depend on it in some way. And so for me, I get these ideas really just from, first of all, this interest in graphic composition, which I was talking about, you know, people like John Cage, Cornelius Cardew, people like that. And then I am also interested in like land and environmental art. And so I kind of am melding these two practices and interests together through a graphic composition. And again, I really just kind of like this, the way that these graphic compositions can talk about a lot of different things, and, you know, and can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And so I really like that breadth of the work, how it can kind of be interpreted by everybody, and the indeterminacy of that interpretation is also very, you know, important to the work as well.
So Brittany, could you share with us what's your connection to the Colorado River?
So my connection to the Colorado River is, you know, I guess I've only lived in Colorado for 4 years, but I grew up in Montana next to the Milk River, which is a tributary of the Missouri River. And so for me, rivers are just really important. Like, my father is a farmer and rancher. He's not really a farmer as much anymore, but he does irrigate his crops. And so, you know, for us, the weather and like, is it raining? Like, that's always like a constant question around in my family, at least. And so I see and appreciate and respect the necessity and the beauty of rivers, you know, both at the same time. So I think that my connection with the Colorado River is really just an appreciation for how small of a river it is, yet how big of an output it gives. I mean, the West is created around the Colorado River, am I right? Like, John Wesley Powell saw the river, and you know, they created LA. That's how LA was created, from that, I think it was Owens Reservoir, I can't remember now, but and so yeah, the West is really created around this river, which I think is so fascinating.
Well, Brittany, you are in exactly the right place to have any of your curiosity satisfied and any of your questions answered. So let's ask another question. And I kind of like this one about, do you have a musical means for representing major dams on the Colorado River, like Glen Canyon Dam and Hoover Dam, and what about the Grand Canyon? I mean, these are monumental images to try to portray.
So those were, if you guys can kind of remember, I wish there was like a slide that I had of the map key, but if you kind of remember looking at the map key in the video, the dams were kind of represented by these like big blocks of black rectangular images. And I'm also like, expressing the river line as different weights of lines. And so the line is like, obviously there's a constant line horizontally going through the page, whether it is, you know, dammed or what have you, there is that constant line, and it is defined by different weights of lines. So like the more outflow that it has, the bigger the line is. The less outflow it has, the smaller the line is. And then once you get to those dams, that's when you see those big blocks of black, just solid black color. And then there's also kind of this like gray that's behind it, and that's representing the reservoir. So to kind of answer another question that I saw behind this one, I did study music formally. I played piano for about 10 or 11 years when I was younger, so I do have a classical understanding of music. And for me, deep listening, this meditative practice, it really kind of it created this interest in looking at classical music in a different way. You know, there are all of these set and defined lines and boundaries that tell us how we're supposed to interpret music, so on and so forth. But again, I really want to go back to that idea of indeterminacy, and I think that it just creates this openness, this open form of work that allows people to interpret it freely.
Well, again, thank you so much, Brittany, for sharing your creativity with us, and thanks everyone for your thoughtful questions. We'll say goodbye to Brittany, but I believe that her full composition is in our library, and so if folks want to explore that a little bit further, that is certainly a possibility. So thank you, Brittany. And with that, I would just like to give one last big virtual hug to our sponsors, and then we can commence with the next session, the Colorado Water Plan, Past, Present, and Future.
Thanks, Casey. And welcome back to the conference again today, everybody. And welcome back to my bungalow as well. I wish I was there with you all in person. We are going to start with a prelude to the plenary this morning and ask Chris Wheatley with Pitkin County Healthy Rivers to give us a brief introduction. So take it away, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris. Pitkin County Healthy Rivers is a citizen action board that has the opportunity to award grants to those programs and projects that meet our mission and focus as an organization. I would encourage everyone to visit our website at pitkinrivers.com, or pitkincountyrivers.com rather, and see if there are ways in which we can help advance or further your goals to keep our water in the streams here in Colorado and in our rivers. I might mention that I bring greetings both from the other board members and by extension from our Board of County Commissioners and from the good people of Pitkin County. And the grant application is a process where we all input. So when I say we all embrace this conference, I truly mean we all do in a very democratic process. And if you're feeling a little cynical and down on government right now, I think volunteering on these citizen action boards is a great way to give yourself some hope and to make democracy and government happen, at least in protecting our vital rivers and streams. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate you being here and, of course, appreciate your sponsorship. At this point, I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras. And today's plenary is Colorado Water Plan, Past, Present, and Future Vision, prioritizing projects that protect watershed health and benefit our water supplies. And I will remind everyone out there that when we're talking about water supplies, we're talking about supplies for lots of different things, including agricultural, municipal, industrial, environmental, and recreational water supplies. So I'm your moderator, Chris Sturm with the Colorado Riparian Association, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And today we have Heather Dutton, Nicole Seltzer, Heather Lewin, and Alex Funk who are going to be speaking with us. It's nice to see all of you. I wish I could see you in person. First, I want to open the plenary up with a few Menti slides. So Diane, if we can move to the next slide, please. And please do participate in these. We want to hear from you today. This is going to hopefully influence some decisions we're making behind the scenes. So thank you guys very much. Have you attended a Basin Roundtable meeting before? And for those of you that are saying, what's that? Not seeing that yet, but we'll watch them trickle in. You know, our Basin Roundtables are there to facilitate discussions on water issues and encourage local collaboration. So there's 9 Basin Roundtables that were created in 2005, and that represents our 8 major river basins and 1 for the Denver metro area. And they diversify stakeholders that actively participate in Colorado water decisions. So seeing pretty even mix here between yes and no. I know that we have got, I'm checking to see how many people we have on right now. We have a decent amount of folks on, so don't be shy to participate in the Menti, everyone. We want to hear from you. While these are still coming in, I'm going to give you guys the ultra short version of Colorado Water Plan history, just to bring everybody up to speed. And the water plan captures key values of Colorado and creates a roadmap for water that leads to a productive economy, efficient and effective water infrastructure, and a strong environment. As the plan is updated, we want to consider the best science, identify new innovations, and refine goals in the face of changing conditions. We also want to hear from a large and diverse group of stakeholders to ensure the water plan represents all of Colorado. And that's exactly what we're doing today by hearing from our panelists and by hearing from you on this Menti application. Okay, so it's about half and half with a few folks that are saying, what's that? So Diane, let's move on to the next slide, please. Have your planning or project efforts received funding through Basin Roundtable Water Supply Reserve funding? So those of you that have been to a meeting before, possibly you were there to pitch one of your projects to see if you could get funding through Basin Roundtable funds. Well, let's give this a few moments. Encouraged to see this someday, I hope. Do not be shy. And if you haven't been to a Basin Roundtable meeting and you're thinking that you want to pursue funding someday, it's never too early to get engaged in that process. Okay, well, while this is rolling, let's let this roll for a little bit more. We don't have a lot of slides today, so you will see the introductory slide come back up a few times while we have our speakers talking, and that's just because we have to have a placeholder of some sort because of the go-to application. And today we're going to start it off with Heather Dutton, and now the other day, took just about 1 minute to write down a phrase that came to my mind as I thought of each of our panelists. And Heather's first. She is the manager with the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District. And when I thought of Heather, the first phrase that came to my mind was leading with compassion. So thank you very much for being here, Heather. And Diane, I'd ask that you just advance to the next slide and we will hear from Heather. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Can I get a thumbs up from the panel if you hear me? I switched. Awesome. Put on the headphones to try to reduce background noise. I appreciate that that introduction, Chris, and you're going to make me tear up already. So I'll try to hold it together. I'm fortunate that in addition to managing the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, I also represent the Rio Grande Basin on the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And that's my incredible honor, and it will help, I think, the audience with some context into how I'm going to frame my portion of the talk. I've been tasked with kind of giving the background and giving the history about the evolution of planning for watershed management and stream management and restoration in Colorado. And so as I was putting this together, I was thinking about how, I've spoken at the Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Conference a few times, and I have my routine. I stay up super late and work on my presentation last minute over beers the night before, and then I get up super early and review, my notes and my presentation the morning of with room service. And so unfortunately, I'm missing those little hash browns from the Westin this morning. And you all know, what I'm talking about. At Casa de Dutton here, we don't have those, even though we have plenty of potatoes. I did have a couple beers last night while I was putting together my final thoughts. So let's just hope that what I thought was a good idea then translates to a good idea this morning. As far as the evolution of planning, I'm thinking about this in the context of us on the phone. Hopefully we're up to 250 folks by now. This community of river lovers learning to walk and then run. And perhaps if you'll hang with me here, we're like Forrest Gump as he learns to use his legs. So starting at the beginning, where did planning for streams and rivers, or when did planning around streams and rivers start? And I would say that it all started with, okay, it's really hard to say where it started. People have been making plans around rivers and water use and streams in Colorado for centuries. And just thinking about, my own family has had water rights out of the Rio Grande for 5 generations now. And so there've been a lot of plans made. Water rights owners and ditch companies themselves have been making plans for how they're going to manage their water rights and the river, but really thinking about kind of narrowing this lens of, okay, how did we and where did we go to get to where we are today with formal stakeholder-driven plans? And so I actually meant to have 2 hats, and I forgot my props this morning, but I'm going to put on my Rio Grande hat for a second and say that one of the first, if not the first, organized, stakeholder-driven, and CWCB-funded plan was the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project Master Plan, or if you don't want that big tongue tie of a name, we lovingly call it the 2001 study. So I'd say let's think of this effort and those like it as Forrest getting the braces on his legs. So he's learning, kind of getting the hardware there so he can learn to walk. The 2001 study was a culmination of planning work and a lot of conversations around the Rio Grande that took place in the late 1990s. It was a study of a 91-mile reach of the Rio Grande, and it was a multifaceted approach that took a really deep look at the physical condition of the river. And so emphasis there on physical condition, that's important later. We really looked at the geomorphology with an eye towards area of high erosion and the riparian vegetation condition. There's a lot of study and concern and efforts to take care of and try to get regeneration of our cottonwood galleries. And then a really key component of that study was the irrigation structure inventory. And so this included a really good look and a really, really detailed assessment of the condition of diversion dams and headgates, and not only how their condition was influencing irrigators' use of them, but also how their condition was influencing the larger river. So at the time, it was a really novel idea, and it was funded by CWCB with a $250,000 grant before CWCB was doing a lot of grants in general, but definitely before they were doing grants for this kind of study. And so yeah, it was kind of cutting edge. It was, the most important part about it was that it was a science-based effort, and it helped our community tremendously in the assessment of our needs and future prioritization of projects on the ground. It was well written, well organized, and is still being used today to support projects in the basin. And a lot of funding has been secured through the roundtable process using the data from the study. And a really great thing about that is that through having this document and then prioritizing and implementing plans, there's been a lot of exposure in the community about the need for and the benefit of river projects. So I also, in trying to do my homework and do a good job of maybe setting the stage for the history of planning, not just here in this area that I know well and love, but trying to maybe get the flavor from the whole state. I spoke with Russ George, and many of you probably know and appreciate Russ's incredible tenure in different roles with the state of Colorado and the CWCB and now the IBCC. And if you have questions about all of these acronyms, note them down and we can address them. Russ said that he remembered the 2001 study and watching to see how it went, and kind of a lot of curiosity around, well, this is a pretty crazy idea. How's it going to go? And he said he also remembered watching other plans around the state, and that really, his interpretation was that so many of these early efforts, and I'm talking early 2000s, were really driven by some of the larger environmental groups or smaller environmental groups working in their basins, wanting to think of ways to have healthier stream flows, and then realizing that to do so, we needed a lot more data to get to the next step. So then somewhere around the creation of the roundtables, which again would have been early to mid 2000s, the assessments of rivers and watersheds picked up a lot of steam around the state. And I'd say we can consider this the area where young Forrest busted out of his, making sure you can see it, busted out of his leg braces and learned he could really run, and then went on to play college football for Alabama. There's young Forrest looking dashing for us. And so a lot of the plans kind of in this age where we as a community are learning to run were responsive to disturbance. We had some pretty big fires in that time, and so there were a lot of assessments of post-fire condition. We've looked at mining impacts and other water quality impacts. And then in the early 2000s, there was a lot of work around how are droughts impacting stream flows and aquatic habitat, or how can climate change do so as well. And so now, from on top of those reactive plans, we also then and really now are seeing this huge excitement around proactive plans. And Russ George described this as a turning point where the greater water community began to and now sees and embraces the need of doing planning together. And I think that the big driver of this has been time, experience, and trust. That by having these plans and having dedicated watershed groups working in communities, we as a larger group of river lovers have built this reputation of getting work done for multiple users. And by building trust with other water users, we're getting support for these plans, not only for the process of having them, but for the utility of using them later to get good work done. And then, of course, another big and obvious driver of the evolution is money. The role of the CWCB has been huge in enabling these plans. And in addition to having staff on the ground helping to facilitate and encourage planning, CWCB has developed funding programs over the years specifically aimed at funding these plans with the goal of having great projects on the ground. And now we're seeing this as a major priority, especially in Colorado's first water plan, and even having its own special pot of money to get these plans done. So kind of thinking about coming full circle, maybe back to the Rio Grande, we started with the 2001 study. We did other structural assessments that covered the entire Rio Grande in Colorado, but none of those assessments included flows, which are critical in understanding aquatic habitat and recreation components. So now through the stream management plan process, we've added that flow analysis. We did an aquatic piece with CPW and Wilson Water Group's flow tools, and we did a recreation assessment with American Whitewater's recreational flow assessment. So over this evolution in the Rio Grande and across the state, I feel that we've gotten really sophisticated in the way that we measure and assess and compile these plans. And in addition to high quality data, I think we as a larger group are doing a great job of working with diverse stakeholders to make sure that these plans are truly holistic for all water users. So I just want to stop for a second and acknowledge that, we've come a really long way in a short amount of time, and it's probably worth some virtual high fives. I'll just because it's impressive to kind of think through, and I'm kind of glad that I got given this task to really think through, you know, where we started and where we are now. And I know that there's a lot of people that have a lot of vision, and I would say just keep going, but also let's celebrate a little bit that we've come a long way. So in addition to the high fives, maybe another Forrest Gump analogy. Now Forrest is running across the country. He's gotten really used to running and using those legs of his, and he's also brought along a bunch of friends along the way. But just like Forrest in this picture, he's wondering, where do we go from here? What, you know, he's in Monument Valley, what's next? Well, personally, my goal from here is to get projects done on the ground to improve rivers in the Rio Grande Basin. And then putting on the CWCB hat, my goal is to get projects done on the ground in the state of Colorado. And so how do we do that? How do we keep moving forward? I think it's with continued science-based assessments and well thought out prioritization. I think it's broadening the tent so that our projects are bold, cutting edge, and have the greatest benefit to the greatest number of water users. And I just want to emphasize that there are huge opportunities for this group at the roundtables right now, that about half of you in the fun little cell phone poll said that you attend roundtable meetings. That's really cool. Let's make it 100%. There's a great intersection right now of and great opportunity at the roundtables, because it's this place where there's a lot of different users and managers at the table. So not only is it a great place for us to go and share about the work we're doing, but it's a great place to go and learn about other people's interests and management goals, and then take those lessons that we've learned together to build really badass projects for the state of Colorado and for our basins. And so I think Chris also highlighted, and I want to get on that train too, that, you know, the roundtables right now are working on updating the basin implementation plans. So let's seize this moment and make sure that all of the good work done in the stream management plans and the integrated watershed management plans and the ditch level assessments and all these other studies is captured in the BIPs, because these plans are the basis for the water plan update, and they're where the projects will be highlighted for the governor's wildly important goal around water. So it's super important right now that the BIPs are thorough and have the priority projects included regarding all these stream restoration ideas. Thanks, Chris. So, okay, here guys, here's your call to action. If you have a project, please work with your roundtable to get it included in the basin implementation project list going forward, so that it goes to the larger Colorado Water Plan and beyond. So I just summarized my thoughts by again imploring you, please go to your roundtable meetings, or at minimum, know your environment, recreation, or watershed health reps on the roundtable. Why should you go to meetings? Because it's fun to see cool people that love water as much as we do. It's fun to make friends and nurture old friendships. And it's fun and exciting to work with our friends to make rivers better for the fish and the wildlife and the bugs and the trees and the farmers and the ranchers and the fisher people and the rafters and everyone and everything that relies on these rivers. So let's just keep going, guys. Let's work together to keep this evolution of planning going and to make the next 20 years as groundbreaking as the last. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Wonderful comments. Thank you. And I guess I should have prompted you guys at the beginning. I do have my little 2-minute card. You saw that, so I'll hold it up for you guys. We did very well there. If we go beyond 2 minutes, I'll probably channel my Sicilian grandmother and just give you the old one of these. So keep an eye out for that. Diane, if you don't mind, next slide, please. So we have another Menti question here. And this is a word cloud, I believe. What are the challenges to evaluating river health in 2 or 3 different words? And as you guys are entering in your challenges here, I'm going to introduce Nicole Seltzer, who's with the River Network. She's the Science and Policy Manager. And my phrase for Nicole, this was a real easy one. I've known Nicole for quite some time now, was perseverance with patience. Nicole is on the ground working with many folks that are putting plans together, and probably has one of the best purviews of what's happening in our environmental and recreational community. as far as needs and funding needs and momentum. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Nicole. But let's give this mentee a few more moments here. No big surprise that we're seeing funding. That's always one of the big challenges. Stakeholder engagement, private land ownership, data. Data is expensive. Good comment there. I'm seeing data in here several different ways. Definition of healthy. Oh, I like that one. We're going to have a chat about that. Accessibility, communication. Okay, so we're getting a lot of things coming in, but funding's still ruling the roost here. Diane, if you don't mind, next slide, please. What would you want the state to create one standard tool for evaluating river health, or would you prefer to have a menu of options? So really looking forward to hearing from you guys on this one. This is not a all or nothing. You can strongly agree, strongly disagree, and let's see if we can get as many comments as possible or as many entries as on this question. So far 10 in, hearing a menu of tools, and that makes sense to me. When I think about this question, the first thing that comes to mind based on my experience is what are we evaluating in time and space? So temporal and spatial scales are very important. I believe Dr. Poff was talking about that yesterday as well in the first plenary panel. So please continue to answer this mentee question. And let's have Nicole jump into the next section. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Chris. Can I
and
get
Diane, just give it a few moments and then advance to the next slide, please.
Yeah, it's not critical. Can I get a thumbs up that you guys can hear me? We're good? Okay, thanks. All right, good morning, everybody. Before I jump in, I just want to pause and say thank you to the conference planners. I know how much goes into planning this event as a multiple year chair in the past. I know it's a ton of work, even virtually, it's a ton of work. So thanks to CWA, WECO, and the Riparian Association for bringing us all together. And to everybody who is out there, it looks like there are 116 of you. I just want to say that I miss you guys so much. I'm really it's a bummer not to be able to be in Avon with you. And when I am sitting in the Weston's hot tub this weekend with my gift certificate that I won at last year's silent auction, I will drink a cocktail in your honor. So at least one of us gets to go. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to put my timer on, talking about the 80% goal that is in the water plan. So 80% of locally prioritized streams having a stream management plan by 2030. And I want to talk about how we're doing and have we made enough progress? And if we haven't made enough progress, what we should do about it. So I want to reiterate just a couple of things that Heather Dutton said, kind of keep them sort of top of mind, and go back to 2015 and think about, what did we want to accomplish when the water, in terms of watershed health, when the water plan was originally created. And in my mind, I wasn't necessarily in this world during that time, but in my mind, what was wanted was to prioritize the stream reaches for assessment and solutions within each basin. We wanted to identify and begin to close the environmental and recreation water gap, and have local groups lead the way with guidance and support from the state. And then we wanted to provide increased resources for people through more money in the Watershed Restoration Grant Program to help communities pay to do this work. So what have we accomplished in the 5 years that have passed since then? As you can see on the map that's up here, this is an interactive map that is housed on the website coloradosmp.org, which is our sort of central resource library for stream management planning in the state. We have about 27 stream management plans that are completed or in progress, and there are a few more that come on every year. Most of them are still in kind of the, in process, that we have started to see some implementation projects come out of these, and you'll hear a little bit more from Heather in the Roaring Fork and the Crystal, but we also have seen some implementation on the Yampa and Steamboat, the Poudre and Fort Collins, and the Rio Grande. So I think it's a little too early to say that we've had a massive impact from those 27 stream management plans, but we are starting to see, I think, a lot of progress. From 2016 to 2020, which is when the stream management plan grants really started, was in 2016, there have been about $3 million in CWCB watershed restoration grant dollars that have gone to support about $6.5 million in stream management plan work, assessments, and all of that. So in my mind, this is $6.5 million of investment in river health that would not have otherwise happened without this goal being in the water plan. And so I think that in and itself is a big win. Some basins have done prioritization of the entire basin or phased assessments of the entire basin, like the Upper Gunnison, the Rio Grande, and the Yampa. But most of them are focused on a reach of a main tributary or a main stem river. So I think as a state, we probably have yet to really get our arms around prioritization in the way that was originally envisioned in the water plan. It's also kind of difficult to suss out the number of miles of stream that are under a stream management plan. So many of the scopes of work and the geographic scales of these are described in square miles of watershed area and not necessarily in stream miles. So I think it's a lot easier to look at the map that's in front of you and see where they're happening. And there are a lot of them, and they cover quite a bit of area of the state, but there's also a lot of places where they aren't happening. And a stream management plan isn't needed everywhere, and it isn't always the right tool. But I do think that we still have a lot of places where we can deploy this as a strategy. So those are kind of the numbers and the dollars. And in my mind, I guess it kind of lacks the big exclamation point that people might have hoped for 5 years ago. But I also think that those numbers and dollars don't really tell the whole story. First of all, this process has been a huge learning curve for people all over the state. When this idea was put into the water plan, nobody really had a standard definition of what a stream management plan was. There were criteria that CWCB would use to tell you like it is or it isn't a stream management plan, but like how you did it and how it was best done and what variables you should measure and how much it costs. And it's been a huge learning process to really figure that out. And so we've been very focused on improving the state of practice of stream health assessments and community river planning by trying different approaches, documenting the pros and cons of those approaches. We've developed a peer learning network for stream management plan practitioners so they can learn from each other. And we're putting all of that out into this central resource library online. And so I think we've done a good job of trying to improve the state of practice and piloting different ideas in different places and seeing what works. We've also really increased the knowledge and capacity of local groups to do stream health assessments. 5 years ago when I entered into this space, a lot of the local groups were really focused more on education, cleanups, and water quality monitoring programs. And there has been a really major shift in thinking more about holistic assessments of river health. And a lot of the tools and knowledge and practices that go along with that are, people are learning how to do this. So I think that there are more groups today learning and practicing these holistic river health assessments than ever before in Colorado. And we've accomplished a lot of that just in the last 5 years. And then finally, I think we've had a lot of success in building bridges between different kinds of water stakeholders. We are requiring people to work together to identify goals, understand important variables, and find solutions that can work for everybody. There's a robust conversation going on about stream health and stream planning in some of the agricultural groups around the state right now that definitely wasn't happening 5 years ago. And so I think we're seeing a lot of new partnerships and relationship building that hopefully will take us forward into implementation of these plans in the future. So is all of that enough? Is the quantity of stream management plans adequate to address the needs of our rivers? I think everybody that's on this call would probably say that more is better, right? But I think you'll get different nuanced answers depending upon who you talk to. So those who are in the trenches, working locally to make these plans happen would probably say, I wish I could do more, but I'm doing all I can do. Stream management plans are hard, they take a long time, they're expensive, and they require a lot of focused attention. And communities, I think, are making progress at a pace that works best for them so that they can do the best possible job and bring the community along with them. That being said, I think there are those who are watching progress from Denver or wherever you sit, and they're more focused on meeting the 80% goal in the water plan. And I think they might feel differently. I think they would look at this map and say, look at all the white space. There's only 27 stream management plans. There's been little basin-wide prioritization. These things take 3 years to finish, and we've seen little evidence of implementation. And so what do you do with that, right? As people who I think are in the trenches on these processes, it gets a little frustrating to poke your head up and say, you should be doing more faster. And so if we're unhappy with the pace and the scale, what needs to be done differently? What can we do to scale up stream management plans? So I want to put forward just a few ideas for consideration. As Heather talked about, CWCB is in the process of updating the BIPs and the water plan. And so I've spent the last 4 years, helping start over a dozen stream management plans in Colorado and doing annual interviews with practitioners. And so hopefully these ideas will give us maybe a place to start. First of all, I think we need to figure out how to prioritize the rivers that are most in need of restoration and protection and that are good candidates for stream management plans. If the goal is going to be 80% of locally prioritized rivers, well, that's meaningless if we don't figure out some way to identify the rivers that are our priority. You can do that in a top-down way by having a state agency do some sort of a prioritization process and then holding the basin roundtables accountable to making that happen. Or we can keep doing what we're doing and have a locally led prioritization, letting local stakeholders prioritize according to methods that they deem best and the input of local stakeholders. It is true that in a lot of places, stream management plans are a quote unquote coalition of the willing rather than a science-driven prioritization of where assessments are needed. But these are new processes, not everybody's comfortable with them, and I am concerned that a top-down prioritization scheme would cause a lot of blowback. So what I would like to see in the water plan is convening a group of folks who are knowledgeable about both ways of working and coming up with a prioritization approach that doesn't cause unnecessary conflict, but also moves the ball forward a little bit. Secondly, I really think we need to invest more in data collection. Heather also mentioned this. The lack of data and the cost of acquiring it makes it really hard to define the environmental and recreational water gap across a wide area. We need more hydrology data, we need more water quality and temperature data, we need to better understand the state of irrigation infrastructure. And how do we do this? Well, do we have one state-sanctioned way to collect basic river health data and have a state agency like CPW collect it and report on it? Or do we let locals lead by propping up the science capacity within watershed groups and letting them decide what they need and how to collect it? My hope is that we can come up with a strategy where local groups work with the state monitoring agencies to deploy monitoring that makes sense, that is not coming entirely out of the pockets of local coalitions. Data collection and long-term monitoring is expensive, and I would like to see the state step up and help with some of that. And then finally, the last thing that I'll say is I hope that the water plan can begin to maybe recognize a little more the role and importance of stakeholder processes in stream management plans. As Sean Cronin with the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District often says, These processes are as much art as they are science, and the art is really the hard part. You know, we need to make these processes move quickly and not get mired down in collaboration and stakeholder processes. But I also think that we need to recognize that that is really fundamental to success in the long term in terms of working with private land and water rights holders. So I hope that the grants moving forward can be more explicit about supporting stakeholder work both in advance and during stream management plans. So I will stop there, and I'll just say, if you've taken nothing else from the last 10 minutes, I would impress upon all of you that getting involved in the water plan update is really critical if you want to preserve the ability of local groups to lead and design their own processes, because otherwise the result may end up being less flexibility to design your own approaches.
Very well spoken. Thank you, Nicole. Diane, can we have the next slide, please? So we have another Menti slide for you here. What are the greatest challenges for implementing watershed health projects? Please choose 2. And as you're entering your choices and segueing from what Nicole just said, I'm going to give you the ultra short version of the governor's WIGs, wildly important goals as they relate to water, and our basin roundtables. So the basins are looking at improving project data and identifying projects by varying level of readiness. The governor's wildly important goals, or WIGs, for water sets a target to identify 500 of the most ready projects that have verified data by June of 2021. It is expected that the projects would represent all areas of the water plan. So the timing is really ripe to get involved in your basin roundtable process and bring your projects forward. Okay, and so next up, very apropos, is Heather Lewin, who is the Director of Science and Policy with the Roaring Fork Conservancy. And Heather's phrase, this was an easy one. Years ago, she taught me this: education is a project. And that has always resonated with me, and I have to remind myself of that when I'm looking at grant applications for education and outreach. It truly is a project. The Roaring Fork Conservancy has very robust planning, has been through a significant amount of watershed planning, as well as a stream management plan on the Crystal River. So Heather's going to talk to us a little bit about project implementation on what I initially was going to say the back end of planning, but we never really stopped planning. So we'll just say during our planning process. And thank you very much for your entries to this Menti question. Lack of funding, of course, jumping to the top, and too many competing interests. So take it away, Heather. Thank you. And Diane, next slide.
All right, thank you, Chris. Yeah, thanks for having me as part of the board here and participating. Sort of funny, I've been looking at my camera this whole time, and there's a little sign that comes up that says, "People can see you, turn your camera off." And I kind of wanted to, but I resisted. So here we are, and yeah, Chris asked me to talk a little bit about the transition between stream management planning and implementation. And I think there might be a little bit of a myth that planning stops when your plan is completed, because really you just go on to the next phase of planning, and it looks a little bit different. The details are a little bit different, but the big picture plan then leads you to these smaller specific planning projects to get them on the ground. And I think that's where we see a lot of the challenge in funding. People say, you already have a plan. Why do you need more planning money? To take that plan and really put it on the ground requires site-specific planning and funding. That's my little soapbox to start with there. But so for us in the Crystal River Management Plan, I think the big thing was when that plan was completed, and I'm sure there are a lot of you watching this who are in the process of planning, and it's a big process and it's a stressful process. And as soon as you get that piece to print and you can hold up your plan and say, here it is, I'm done, it's a huge river monkey off your back. It just, you can take a deep breath and you can relax for a second, but then you realize that this plan is only as useful as the pages that are turned in it and the amount that it's actually put to use and on the ground. And so the break that and the relief doesn't last as long as I think we sort of wish it did, because the next piece comes real quick, and let's put some of these projects on the ground and let's see what we can really get done now that we have at least the contacts, we've got some people engaged, we've got the data, we've got the planning, we've got a lot of information. And so the final section of the Crystal River Management Plan contains some more direct, here are some great next steps, here's some next level implementation, here's where we'd like to go. And some of those we found we've really driven in that direction, and some of them have been a little bit more vague and have become components of sort of larger projects. So at the time I have, I want to talk to you about 2 implementation projects that we've worked on over the past couple of years. The Crystal River Plan was published in 2016, and so we've been working since then to come up with some of these on the ground processes. So first, well, two projects. One is a diversion rescheduling agreement for a little bit more water in the stream, and the second is a restoration project. So the diversion rescheduling agreement was one of those directed outcomes from the management plan. The Colorado Water Trust led that effort, and that sort of as an aside, one of the greatest things that's been able to come out of this plan is that we've had other groups and other entities that have taken the plan and said, okay, here's a great project that we can do out of this. And then us, Roaring Fork Conservancy, has been able to play more of a supporting role, because I don't think just because we're sort of the holder of that plan, we're able to do all the implementation that's possible within it. So being able to really step back and support other groups has been really important for us. So Colorado Water Trust really led this effort with a local ranch, Cold Mountain Ranch. Cold Mountain Ranch lies just south of the town of Carbondale, so that's upstream on the Crystal. And the idea of the original agreement was a non-diversion agreement that would allow for the ranch owner to shut down their head gate. They take about 6 CFS out of the river, add that water to the stream in times when it would be environmentally beneficial. And so through the planning process, we found that we're looking for a target of about 40 CFS in the stream. And if we're well below that 40 CFS, it's not worth the sacrifice to the ranch for them to turn off that head gate and to not get that water. And if we're well above that ecologically, even though it's a bit below the in-stream flow, we're still seeing enough resiliency in the river at those higher numbers. So to be able to work this agreement, it was reframed and reworded a little bit. Instead of being a non-diversion agreement, to a diversion rescheduling agreement. So it didn't mean they weren't going to divert, it meant that they were going to change the timing of that diversion. Diversion lies on one of the most dewatered stretches of the Crystal, so we saw this as a really great opportunity to not only add water to this reach, but also to be an example, to be able to show other water rights holders that this was possible, that this wouldn't compromise their water rights or create any sort of legal issues for people. So by having this one rancher willing to implement, that would hopefully trigger others. By having more people involved, the impact to one person becomes less, the opportunities become greater. And that was sort of like the dream goal there. So we're right now in the 3rd year of that 3-year agreement. And unfortunately, the conditions haven't been right for that process to run. Well, wait a minute, like we've had 2 drought years in the past 3 years. Unfortunately, the plan is that particular agreement with the amount of water that's involved is really set up for a mid-dry year, not a super dry year. And we basically had 2 really dry years and 1 really wet year. And so we weren't able to get the conditions right for the rancher to be able to execute this agreement, which, you know, Heather Dutton talked a little bit about the Forrest Gump analogy, and I was trying to remember if Forrest Gump ever got tackled really hard when he was running with football, because that's kind of what we felt like, right? We had the ball, we had the agreement in place, we got it all set up, and we're running, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, it just didn't come together. We had hoped it would. So, you know, I think that's part of implementation, right? We're learning as we go. And basically, the other piece, the other challenge was accountability. We had to know if the water was moving in the right parameters for the agreement to run. That involved increasing gauging. So we added 3 more gauges to the crystal. We worked with the Katina Foundation to fund those 3 gauges. So now those are up and operational in dry years. So that's helped our process. And I guess the good news is we do have interest from the rancher in re-signing and revamping this agreement. We're working with the Colorado Trust to kind of sort out some of those details and see, is there a way that we can rewrite and rethink this so that in the next 3-year cycle, it's more likely to be able to be implemented. And so that's kind of where we're at on that one. So a good learning process as it came along, sort of challenging when it came to really putting it on the ground, but hopefully we're going to be able to take those lessons learned and grow and build in the next agreement from there. The other project that I wanted to talk about is a Crystal River Riverfront Park restoration. And that's partnering with the town of Carbondale. And this one is kind of, we've seen as a great multi-benefit project. It kind of combines all these great things that we put together in the stream management plan in an area that can both benefit the stream and be a great example for private property owners. And we're really excited to have the town of Carbondale as a partner to be able to take the lead in a project that works as such a good example of so many different components. And so the project contains efficiency components, in-stream restoration, riparian restoration, and education. That's right, Chris, education is a project again. I don't remember saying that, but I'm glad I did. So if we break down the project, so the picture that you're seeing on the screen that you've seen this throughout the my talking here is Riverfront Park is on your left. So it's the area that you see the riparian vegetation in with a golf course up on the side of it. Golf course is River Valley Ranch. It's also a pretty good sized subdivision. So the area was a former ranch that was then turned into golf course and housing. With this park kept as property for the town. It's got some sort of primitive trails that move through it. It's got some older signage and pieces. And so it also happens to contain the headgate for the town of Carbondale's Weaver Ditch, and you can sort of see the diversion structure that's in there. And so it created this opportunity to look at in-stream, to look at efficiency, to look at riparian vegetation. And I'll talk a little bit more about why the education component here is so great. So efficiency, the town of Carbondale has 3 raw water ditches. This one flows through the town as an open ditch. It's used to water town parks and property, but it's also sort of unique in that if you live on this ditch, you can stick a pump in the ditch and pump water to water your lawn or wash your car or whatever you want to do with it. It's not regulated. As long as you live on the ditch, that raw water is open and free. So kind of a unique setup. So the town of Carbondale, as we've worked with them, basically you can see in the design of the diversion structure, it's a lot of small cobbles pushed up. And so we saw 2 opportunities here. One is at the headgate, because it's such an unusual use of water, is that if we could automate this headgate and really fine tune it so that it could be used only when it's really needed. And so you talk about when folks water their lawns, right, in the morning and usually early morning, late afternoon. So are there ways that we can either turn up and down the headgate just as water is needed, or can you sort of retrain people to just water during those times by having water in the ditch at those times? And then the other idea, the Crystal is a really sediment-laden river, and it has a lot of kind of microburst events. And so could the town protect their assets in the ditch a bit more by being able to quickly close down that ditch if they know that they've got a really heavy sediment event upstream? So from this aerial, you can see all those cobbles, and you'll be able to see it a little better in the next slide, but kind of far down by the bridge, basically they push up those cobbles in a dry year in a wet year, high water comes down and washes them all and deposits them downstream. And you can see that a little bit if we can move to the next slide. And so our hope is to create a more sustainable diversion structure that doesn't impact downstream and is also more fish friendly, less maintenance, more functional part of the river, while also providing the town the water that it needs.
Heather, I'm going to jump in real quick. Diane, can you advance to the next slide, please?
Thank you.
Heather, just an update. We're just about out of time.
Okay. So let me give you just a real quick. So in channel piece, you can see the rocks that were deposited downstream will create a low flow channel. The riparian restoration, we used a preserve, enhance, create sort of philosophy. It's not a scrape and rebuild. So that preserves a lot of the good birding habitat, a lot of the good that's there, creates access points for angling, popular angling area. And then education-wise, there's in the plans, there's a ADA accessible access point, which is one of the only access points to the Crystal River in the town of Carbondale that would be ADA accessible. And it's also within walking distance of 5 schools, from elementary schools to high schools. So it creates a great opportunity for on-site learning and education. The quick takeaways from this project is full of partnerships. Town of Carbondale, Aspen Valley Land Trust, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, CWCB has been a funder, Healthy Rivers and Streams, Pitkin County Healthy Rivers and Streams is a funder, Aspen Skiing Company, Forever Our Rivers. So big projects take big partnerships, and we're really grateful that we've had a great community that's been able to come together and keep working towards this. The other small takeaway, I mentioned before, having other groups come in, use the plan. One of the ones that's done that the best is Colorado Rocky Mountain School. They've implemented 2 different projects on properties that they own. One is the cattle exclusion and riparian restoration. But I guess one of the big takeaways is that for us, there isn't one big magic project. It's a lot of small projects coming together, a lot of different groups coming together to create projects that are good projects that are replicable, that keep us moving towards those bigger picture goals and have multiple benefits to multiple parties. Thanks for not giving me the Sicilian grandma. I tried.
Thank you, Heather. Diane, please advance us 2 slides. There we go. All right, another Menti question for you. What is the most effective strategy for developing multi-purpose projects that benefit both the environment and water supplies? So please choose 2 from the list. If you're having trouble reading it on the screen, it's usually easier to see it in your Menti application on your phone or your open browser window. So next up we have Alex Funk. He works with me at the Water Conservation Board as an agricultural water resource specialist. Alex, my phrase that I thought of immediately when your name came up was challenging paradigms. And I will offer you a little bit of advice. Be wary of people that are telling you how good of a job you're doing, because they're setting you up to do more work. But Alex is truly passionate about what he does and very glad to have him with us today. Let's look at some of the answers that are coming in. Identifying and implementing projects through a collaborative planning process, establishing vibrant local watershed groups. So those are our 1 and 2, but also seeing people choosing delivered on the ground one-on-one engagement and participation in the roundtables. So thanks to all of you for participating in our Menti questions. And Diane, if you don't mind just leaving this up or never mind. Let's just leave it up for a little bit while Alex starts, because he doesn't have any slides. Give it a minute or so, and then we can advance to the last one. So take it away, Alex.
Great, thanks, Chris. Everyone can hear me as well. I guess a little bit of background. So, I mean, I've gotten a lot of questions. It kind of feels like yesterday when I started at CWCB, but I think right off the bat, I was sort of pulled into this stream management planning discussion, and kind of remember going to Chris's office and being like, I don't really have a dog in this fight because I'm an ag specialist. I don't really know why I'm working on stream management plans. And Chris was like, you're working for the state now. This is one of our kind of like key objectives and programs, and have kind of been, I don't know, it's been a really interesting experience, and kind of interested in kind of see, sort of how the ag sector can play more of a role in these efforts, and really highlighting the benefits that, can kind of accrue for different stakeholders as part of these planning processes. And so, and I think as several of the panelists have alluded to, we've seen a lot of engagement from the ag sector in these efforts over particularly the last 2 years. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But I think I also just want to highlight that we're starting to see, I think, more plans as well actually being led by more ag-centric organizations, including conservation districts. And this is certainly a promising trend, and want to see that continue. So about 2 years ago, we started working on a project with the Colorado Cattlemen's Association and also the River Network, on kind of looking at ways to, sort of how we can sort of increase engagement opportunities for the ag sector in stream management plans. And so we've been working with, I think many of you know Phil Brink and Greg Peterson with Colorado Ag Water Alliance, two organizations that have been really active in sort of this engagement work. But last year they came out with a survey that talked with ag producers about sort of their sort of familiarity with stream management plans, integrated watershed management planning, sort of where they see opportunities. And there were some really interesting findings from that survey that I won't go into here in depth, but I wanted to highlight that I think one of the key findings was that ag producers really do want to engage in voluntary water related planning activities, particularly where there's a value add to producers in the ag community. And so there's really where there's an opportunity to perhaps increase viability and profitability of a ditch system or an operation, an opportunity to sort of build relationships and sort of perspectives on the role working landscapes play, and sort of their habitat and ecosystem benefits, and really kind of this like positive sort of engagement, but kind of wanting to learn more about it and kind of understanding how they can play more of an active role. And I think one of the key benefits that have been highlighted out of that effort and sort of some example stream management planning efforts across the state is that we've really seen that by including projects into these plans, particularly multi-benefit projects, it can really open up new funding sources, both public and private, for sort of critical irrigation water infrastructure improvements. And this is something that I think there's been a trend, particularly at the state level, but also if you look at a lot of like federal, USDA, natural resource conservation programs, a lot of those have similar sort of, metrics in that they're looking for these projects that do have multi-benefits that are, benefiting ag producers, but are also sort of addressing these kind of critical natural resource needs as well. And so, I think integrated plans and stream management plans really provide a vehicle for helping, bring projects that otherwise wouldn't really be competitive on their own into this like kind of portfolio that can make them really compelling projects for some of these like larger federal programs and state programs. I do want to note, and I guess I think this challenge has come up quite a bit on the panel today, but I think one of the challenges that remains is that in sharing these success stories with the broader ag community. I think ag can't, a lot of the stakeholders that, I've talked to or have been interviewed as part of that Cattlemen's project really do have stressed that, they are engaged in the planning, but they really want to see it go somewhere. And so I think that implementation story is absolutely critical to this story or sort of success for this program. And maybe that's something that CWCB can be doing more effectively, along with continuing to support these innovative strategies, is kind of telling that, as these plans sort of shift from, I know they never end on the planning side, but as they shift more towards implementation, maybe we're kind of highlighting those stories more often and kind of sharing those successes to kind of show that, yeah, these planning efforts are kind of moving towards that ultimate goal of implementing and funding these projects. Two other points that I'll touch on. We've talked about this a lot already on the panel, but really the timing more so than I think ever there's a real opportunity to connect, these integrated planning efforts with the basin implementation plan update and really the statewide update. And so if folks on the panel or call today aren't, really familiar with these processes, the state is under the process of sort of, updating both the basin plans and the statewide plan over the next, year and a half or so. With the update, there's a real opportunity to kind of, bring, new projects to light and kind of incorporate it into, these tiered project lists that each of the roundtables are currently really in the process of putting together. And so, over the course of, the remainder of this year and into next, it's a really, great time. And kind of going back to that first poll, if you've never been engaged with the Basin Roundtable, I think there hasn't been a more important time to do so. And just want to definitely highlight that. I know several panelists have mentioned it. And I think given that, the DNR WIG and all these other sort of metrics are sort of aligning with this movement towards supporting what we're calling tier 1 projects that are kind of coming out of that priority setting process. A lot of CWCB funding and other funding are kind of geared towards that. So I think it's pretty critical that we are moving projects identified in stream management plans into those basin roundtable lists. And if you really look at the metrics that are being used for tiering projects, projects that are coming out of stream management plan efforts are really well aligned to be tier 1 high priority projects. I mean, these projects typically will have an identified project proponent. They're maybe perhaps more shovel ready than projects that, haven't been identified through some sort of collaborative process. There's community support, there's alignment with the water plan and basin implementation plan. And I think some of these integrated plans also provide, sort of prelim, if not more detailed cost estimates of what some of these projects might actually require, in terms of actually implementing them. And so all those factors align really well with the work being performed as part of, sort of these collaborative planning efforts and sort of what the roundtables are looking for. So I think there's a lot of synergy there to sort of match up those efforts. And I guess I'll also just note that, the water plan grant cycle is also coming up, and I think we've seen a trend of the last few cycles where we're starting to see projects come out of these integrated planning efforts, and those projects are really competitive for that program as well. And so it definitely plug that upcoming December 1st deadline for that program or other grant programs, and I think these projects tend to be a really good fit for those as well. And definitely encourage planning leads to reach out to CWCB staff to kind of talk about those opportunities and some funding strategies to kind of maybe work towards implementing those projects. I guess the last thing I'll just want to note, as I kind of see another opportunity for stream management plans and integrated plans, but also potentially a barrier, is that personally I think we should be shooting for 100% coverage of integrated planning across the state. I mean, I think these plans are just such an effective way to sort of prioritize projects, identify, sort of multi-benefit projects that I think they're a great vehicle that allow the roundtables and other stakeholders to go a little bit deeper than I think what's going on just at the BIP level. And so would, kind of encourage that we work to cover that everywhere, with the caveat that I think it's really important that we work with our, federal and, sort of other state agencies to align those plans to meet other requirements. So, for example, EPA has a 9-element watershed plan that's more focused on water quality. By having that plan, that opens up 319 grant funding that's administered by CDPHE. NRCS has PL 566 watershed plans. All of them have sort of requirements that open up other funding. I think one thing that we could be working towards, and I've heard a source of frustration, is we have all these different types of plans that open up new buckets of funding. Wouldn't it be great if one of them were able to like kind of encompass all those planning needs to make sure that we are not having to duplicate planning efforts? And so I think that's one thing that we're certainly trying to hopefully work towards, and that, I think would be a good, process to work towards sort of integrating these plans to make sure that they're aligning. And I think that way, we don't run into sort of planning overload, which I know a lot of stakeholders kind of can get frustrated with. And that way we're kind of moving towards, hopefully, plans that can really have a roadmap for moving forward. So, I guess with that, I'm excited to answer audience questions or, and any more feedback for how CWCP is approaching this work.
Great. Thanks a lot, Alex. That's why we bring you into sweep. Now we've got some time for questions. Diane, if you don't mind advancing us to the next slide, please. And here's our opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. So please pull out your Menti browser and enter some questions for the panelists. I really appreciate all of you being here today and brought up some really good points. I'm glad that we're recording this. I'm going to be passing this on to some other folks at the CWCB as well as our consultants because I think there's some valuable information in here that's going to help inform our update. So while we're entering questions in, Nicole, if you don't mind, I'm curious about how you envision us coordinating the data needs of so many folks around the state, and would just like to hear you explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, I do not have a simple answer. But I do think, I have been involved in enough stream management plans at this point to know that the lack of data on the front end can really hinder the assessments that you do, and it drives up the cost. And so I think what I would like to see is if, some of the state agencies that are resource monitoring, DWR and CPW, and if they could get together with some of the local groups that are doing stream management plans and try to understand what are some of the common data needs that are gaps right now, and then can we figure out a way to fill those that isn't, each individual organization having to cobble together money, at a local level. Like, is there a way that the state can sort of boost some of the common river health monitoring programs around the state, but do that in a way that's sensitive to local priorities? And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think about Heather and the challenges that they had in trying to find money to put new gauges in so they could monitor environmental flows. And it just doesn't seem right, that we should be putting that burden on, local philanthropy when it's something that's kind of in the water plan.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Diane, or whomever's controlling the Menti for us, can we scroll to the top? Thank you. I saw some questions in here related to grant programs and more information about roundtables. If you guys don't mind, you can reach out to Alex or I directly on those. Chris.Sturm, S-T-U-R-M, @state.co.us. And you can also contact us through the expo just by clicking on us in the bios for each presentation. But so let's look through some of these projects and see what jumps out at us. What's the #1 project need to know for a successful project? Anybody want to take that one? What's the #1 thing proponents need to know for a successful project? Yeah, someone wants to take that one. There's so many things
I'll
that
take
we.
it. No, I'll
All
take
right,
it.
Nicole,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Heather, you go, and then I'll bat sweep.
I mean, I would just say that every area is different, and so it's I guess my answer is probably not going to be. I mean, there's no secret sauce. Because every community and every river and every watershed is so different. So it's not like there's a perfect menu, but we do have these general concepts. And I think that the number one thing is to make sure that the right people are at the table. And so I guess that's where I say, well, the right people, we don't have this menu of who those people are, but by, you know, getting in the community and building the trust and understanding kind of who's who and who's using water, and not only who's using water today, but how will the water needs and demands change in the future, and making sure that the voices for all those different uses are engaged and kept in the loop, I think is critical, because I think one of the most frustrating and hurtful things that can happen to people is to feel like they really care about this water resource or this river and they weren't included. And so it's a lot of work up front on the proponents, but I think it's a critical piece, is to make sure that work is done on the ground to make sure that the right people are included.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I would just, you know, I think it's important to collaboratively identify your goals. And when you do that, people will show up if they're excited by your goals, and they'll probably give you money. So, you know, trying to be collaborative on the front end when you're establishing what it is you want to accomplish will benefit you down the road.
Great, thank you guys. And Diane, if you could just show us the questions, let's look through here. If there's anything that's jumping out, I will answer the one. The CWCB did combine the water plan grant deadlines. That's largely because of our funding situation with COVID and the need to stretch that money over more than 1 year. So again, you can contact Alex or I if you have more questions about that.
Chris, while you're looking for another question, I saw a really simple one where someone asked how to get involved in roundtable meetings. So they're on the CWCB's homepage and in the snazzy Colorado Watershed Assembly newsletter that goes out periodically, there is a list of when the monthly roundtable meetings are. And if you're struggling with that, send me an email, heather@slvwcd.org, and I will help you. I promise I will personally help you figure out when your roundtable meeting is.
Okay, is anything else jumping out at folks here? I see something about NRCS and EQIP. We're getting a lot of comments. If you were to pursue a river health assessment, diversion structure assessment, should we apply? Yes, apply. That's always a good idea. Let's move on to the next one. Successful projects require buy-in, lots of comments. What's this? Alex's call for integrated framework for planning to unlock funding opportunities is great. This has been done successfully in other realms. Okay, thank you. Someone says you need to be passionate about watersheds. Earlier, Nicole was quoting Sean by saying it's as much art as science. And I've always said the number one thing you need is a muse. You really do need to inspire people to successfully pull off projects. In terms of statewide data sets related to river health, what do you see as the 1 to 3 top wish list data sets to enable better watershed planning?
I'd like to hear Heather's take on that.
We got 2 Heathers.
Oh, sorry, I meant Heather Lewin. Hi, Heather.
Well, that's a tough one, because I think in a lot of ways we're really lucky in our watershed because we have been a long established watershed organization that's done a lot of the water quality. You know, I think we've got over 30 water quality sampling sites that happen quarterly in our valley. And so we've got a lot of that information, and that's certainly been helpful. You know, the gauging piece is an interesting one because we do see the flow issue come up, and the placement and funding of gauges is tricky. And I think, you know, being able to look at some of those more stream health components riparian vegetation, space for the river to move, all those sorts of things I think are really important because it's not just the flow. There's a lot of other pieces. And sometimes we get really flow centric in thinking about a river, but those other components are really important as well.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. We really appreciate you guys participating in today's panel. Appreciate the audience very much for participating in the Mentee. Got a lot to take back. Again, if you want to contact any of us, please just find our information through the Expo platform for this section, and you'll see our information. So thanks again. Virtual applause to all of you guys. You did an absolutely wonderful job. We're going to move forward with just a few announcements before we go to lunch. And so the speakers, if you don't mind muting yourselves. So field trips are tomorrow. Remember to follow the COVID protocols. You guys have heard it several times now. And let us know if you're not going to be able to make it. There's going to be a survey emailed out to you tonight. Please complete that for us. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this as far as the Watershed Conference is a virtual platform, and we do want to hear from you. Next. The conference wraps up today. We have an unusual happy hour, 3:45 to 4:30. Please come join us. I went to the social part yesterday and found it very fun and engaging. So please join us if you can, and visit the virtual expo hall by clicking on the exhibitor list through the expo application. There's several different places to find it, but it is a tab that says exhibitors. If you visit all the booths and complete the Google form that we emailed you, there's some wonderful prizes that you can win. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my phone because I'm getting texts from the committee on other things I'm supposed to mention. I think maybe I hit everything. Do we have any other announcement slides? Share us on social media, folks, and thank you. Our next session will be starting at 12:30, so 30 minutes for lunch, and we will see you soon. You have to exit out of this one and then return. Okay, thank you, everyone. Enjoy lunch.